Good evening, everyone. Good evening to everyone watching live online. We are here tonight to honor two men who didn't need the internet, who were born long before the creation of the internet, but they still became and still are household names. Ladies and gentlemen, the former BBC political editor, Stephen Grimason, and the former UTV political editor, Ken Reid. They are looking very uncomfortable, and they're old school, and old school journalism teaches you never become the story. We all feel your pain. It's great to have a room of so many people connected to the media industry on all sides of the fence, from all eras, past and present. Thank you for making the effort to come here tonight. Let me just tell you about the running order tonight. I have it in my hand. What we're going to do is, we're very grateful to Queen's University for hosting tonight's event, and we're going to hear from them. We're going to hear them from Ken and Stephen. We have a little surprise as well on that big screen. Thank you to the librarians at the BBC and UTV, and also to NI Screen. But first things first, let's introduce our host, the Vice-Chancellor of Queen's University here in Belfast, Professor Sir Ian Greer. Sir Ian.
So thank you, Mark, and can I welcome you all to this very special occasion. I'm really delighted to be joined this evening by so many high-profile and well-known figures from the world of media and communications. But most of all, I want to welcome Ken Reid and Stephen Grimason, as we recognise their truly remarkable contributions to journalism over the past 40 years or more. No individual achieves great things on their own. There's always a network of family, of friends, of colleagues who pave the way for their success. So I'm delighted that we can also welcome the families and friends of Ken and Stephen. Ken and Stephen will be the first recipients from their profession to receive the Queen's University Chancellor's Medal. And I can think of no more deserving individuals to break this new ground. Last April, Queen's held a major international event to mark the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. An agreement that brought to the end 30 years of conflict here in Northern Ireland. The Troubles saw some world-class journalism emanate from here. They provided a vital public service during the dark days of fear and uncertainty. Many of the prominent names across national and international media indeed honed their craft here. More importantly, many of our best and most influential reporters stayed here. I see many of them in our audience this evening, and for many years they performed a vital service in holding our governments, our politicians, and indeed the actors in the conflict to account. They showed incredible bravery in reporting events on our streets, often in quite distressing circumstances, dealing with sights and situations that none of us should see in the course of our everyday work, often impacting on their own mental well-being. While we were planning the GFA 25 event in Queen's last year, we realised that the role of our reporters, the camera crews, the photographers, the sound crews, and others who were part of the media production process had never been fully recognised for their incredible contribution. They not only covered events, but they also uncovered the sometimes unpalatable truths that would have remained hidden without their courage. They continued their work through the peace process, and even today, with all the political uncertainty, their journalism continues to shine a light on the many challenges we face at home and abroad. For that reason, we decided to host the Media in Conflict and Peace event as a major part of our three-day conference for the GFA 25. And I know that many of you here in the Great Hall today attended that evening in the Queen's Film Theatre. Many commented that it had provided the very first opportunity for journalists to talk about their challenges, personal and professional, and indeed for many it was a cathartic experience. Amongst the highlights of that occasion, and indeed the whole of the GFA 25 event, was the bravery of these two men who we celebrate tonight. It's widely known that they both have suffered health challenges in recent times, yet they made extraordinary efforts to attend back in April. Ken even left his hospital bed for a few hours to be there, while Stephen took a break from his ongoing treatment. Tonight, they've gone beyond what anyone could expect to honour us with their presence, so thank you both. Given their key roles as political editors of UTV and BBC back in 1998, and their continued prominent media roles for a further 20 years, we believe that we must not only recognise their incredible commitment, but also honour their massive contribution to our society. As Vice-Chancellor of this great university, I was immensely proud that Queen's acknowledged the role of the media last April, but I'm even prouder that we recognise the work of these two extraordinary men tonight. Given the incredible importance of the media as the fourth estate, and with the convening power of Queen's to provide a safe place for difficult and honest conversations, we're committed to continuing to provide media professionals with opportunities to discuss issues of importance. Indeed, we're planning a conference to explore the challenges of ensuring a strong media that can hold the powerful to account in a changing and uncertain world. So I look forward to hearing the memories and the views of Ken and Stephen in conversation with their former colleague, Mark Simpson. But first, let me introduce a colleague, a former Press Association correspondent working alongside both men for many years, and now a member of our law school here at Queen's. With that link, there could be no more person fitting to deliver the Chancellor's Medal citation for Ken and Stephen. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Rosie Cowan.
Good evening and welcome again to Queen's. It's lovely to see so many old friends in the audience, a veritable who's who of local and, as the Vice-Chancellor has said, indeed world-class journalism. We breed them here. As the Vice-Chancellor has told you, the Queen's University Chancellor's Medal Awards were inaugurated last year during Agreement 25, the conference which marked the 25th anniversary of the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. These awards were created so that we could celebrate achievement in civic leadership in all its aspects. Tonight, we are delighted to recognise the work of two outstanding political journalists, two men who have had a significant role in reporting to this community for many years. And I'll welcome them again, Ken Reid and Stephen Grimason. Another excuse for you to give them a round of applause. Journalism is a high-octane business. There's a constant drive for exclusives, to be first, to dig down and find out what's really going on. And nowhere was the pressure greater than during those uncertain weeks, days, hours in 1998, which would eventually lead to the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. During that period, when rumours were rife and facts were thin on the ground, Ken and Stephen, as political editors of BBC Northern Ireland and UTV respectively, provided vital and informed news and analysis for a society in need, a society on the brink of great change. Their reporting was indeed the first draft of history. But now I want to reel back a little and talk about the long-time friendship and connection between these two, which began back in the 1980s when they were both working for Sunday News. Let me talk first about Ken Reid. He was born in Belfast, went to Methodist College, then the University of Hull, where he edited the student paper. His first professional job after university was at the Newsletter, where he worked for 7 years, from 1977 till 1984. Then he moved to Sunday News, where he eventually became editor. In 1987, he headed south to join the Cork Examiner, And while he was there, he began to make occasional television news appearances. And this brought him to the attention of UTV, which he joined in 1994 and then went on to become political editor. Ken was named News Broadcaster of the Year twice at the CIPR Press and Broadcast Awards in 2005 and 2006, and he retired in 2021. Political journalism involves building reliable sources. It's all about establishing relationships and trust with politicians and others without sacrificing your editorial principles and independence. But there's a fair bit of socialising too, and you do need a good sense of humour. Boys are bracing themselves now for what's to come. At an SDLP conference some years ago, Seamus Mallon was relaxing in the bar among a group of journalists. Ken was one of them. And John Hume was also in the room, and eventually he came over to join the main group. Now, Messrs Hume and Mallon might have been political partners, but they weren't exactly soulmates. In the next half hour of general chat, neither man said a single word to the other. So eventually Ken stood up and turned to Mr Hume and said, "John, have you met Seamus Mallon?" We'll let you off the hook for now. Now, Stephen Grimason comes from Lurgan. We'll not hold that against him. And he cut his journalistic teeth working on the local paper, no better place. News gathering was very different in those days. It wasn't the tick-tock, but rather the knock-knock generation. Without the internet, we had to literally knock on doors to get our stories. So from working in print, Stephen moved to broadcast news at the BBC, where he was a reporter, went on to become local government correspondent, eventually political editor. And that was in the historic year of 1998. Stephen, of course, is famous for a particular moment. You all know it. On Good Friday that year, he appeared on BBC News about 1:30, brandishing a copy of the actual agreement, hours before it was revealed to the world. Scoops don't get much better. He won't ever say how he got that document or from whom, but it was a tribute to his dedicated cultivation of relationships and sources and evidence of mutual trust. Breaking big stories can be problematic. There are often those who'll try to get in the way, but Stephen was never afraid to stand his ground against very senior and sometimes very awkward politicians who questioned his integrity. For Stephen, it's always been about doing the right thing, and he carried those principles with him when he left the BBC to become Director of Communications for the new Northern Ireland Executive. Now, I know both these men well from my former career as a journalist, first with the Press Association, then with The Guardian. We all spent many hours, days and nights standing together outside castle buildings, and Mark was there too, charting the rise and the fall, and the rise and the fall of the Stormont Assembly, and so it goes on today. It was cold, tiring work, but I'll always have warm memories of Ken and Stephen's kindness and good humour. I remember Ken telling us about one of his children who was asked at school what he did for a living to be told, "My dad stands outside buildings." I think the other kids got the impression that he was a nightclub bouncer. I also recall an occasion where Stephen had somehow procured a rather fancy, colourful gazebo to keep the rain off while he was broadcasting. Oh, that led to a bit of teasing from Ken in the UTV camp. There was talk of garden parties and what was he up to? But on a more serious note, Ken and Stephen share a deep affection for this place and hopes for a better future. About a year ago, William Crawley interviewed Stephen on Talkback about his life and career, and Stephen picked some of his favourite music. Top of the list was a Paul Brady song, "The Island," with this lyric. "Up here we sacrifice our children to feed the worn-out dreams of yesterday and teach them dying will lead us into glory." As Stephen said then, it's a timely reminder of where we have been and why we don't want to go back. It's no secret that for some time both Stephen and Ken have been battling serious illness. They are doing so with courage and strength, and they deserve our admiration. But we wouldn't expect anything less from these two, who showed such courage and strength throughout their working lives. They are, quite simply, giants of political journalism, both in this part of the world and globally. I'm sure you'll all agree that there are no two more deserving people to be the first in their profession to be recognised by this award of the Chancellor's Medal. And so I call upon our Vice-Chancellor, Sir Ian Greer, to come back to the stage to make the formal presentations to Ken Reid and Stephen Grimason. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cowan. Thank you, Sir Ian. Ken, Stephen, I have lots of questions, and it's going to be a bit like This Is Your Life. I'm going to go down to the audience at some stage. But first of all, Stephen, not over there, okay. Is that where the Grimasons are? Okay. And okay, it's like a wedding, is it? Okay. Stephen's are on the left wing, right? We note that. Stephen, this award from Queen's Tonight and tonight's occasion, a couple of words.
It just means the world to both me and Ken. I mean, for a wee lad from the Mornview estate in Lurgan, it's not bad. And I think Ken feels the same from his North Belfast roots. I mean, look, we did our best, and we were brought up to believe that we weren't the important people in the story. My first editor, David Armstrong in Portadown, and if you ever want a hard job, try being the editor of the Portadown News during Drumcree. He said to me, look, you can be the oldest tramp on the street, but if you're interviewing him, he's more important than you because he's making the news, you're just reporting it. Don't get ahead of yourself. And it was a wonderful thing. So we just tried to be good hacks. I
think what's important is also people took a risk with us. That John True, my first editor in the newsletter, my interview for my first job as a reporter in the newsletter was in McLeod's Bar, changed times, and later on Alan Crosby in the Cork Examiner, and then Rob Morrison in UTV. And you need people to back you. I always say when young people ask me for career advice, you take a chance yourself, but you always need someone to have faith in you. And that certainly, I think, happened to both of us.
It did indeed. I mean, I came under the wing of Barry Cowan in the BBC, a very colourful character, but one of the best jam journalists I ever knew. And he said to me once, don't be writing down loads of questions for your interviews. Write one and then listen to the answer. Wow. And if you listen to the answer, you'll get the next question. It was brilliant. And he also, I just become political correspondent, and he said, I came back to the office after doing a piece to camera, I think it was in Banbridge. He said, come here, you. He said, you're a political correspondent. Now, lose that anorak and get yourself a decent coat.
Yeah. One person I have to pay tribute to can't be here tonight because he's not well. It's Jim McDowell. Jim was a great mentor throughout my career, and somebody that I would turn to quite a bit. Jim's pretty ill at the moment, but I think he's on his way back.
That's good to hear. Yeah. I'm going to talk to you individually for a minute or two about your own careers, and as I say, I've got a video as well to show you. But first of all, before we come to that, how did you two get on over the years?
I think... you want the truth? No? I think Stephen summed it up once. He said about if you play golf with a friend, you still remain friends, but you would cut each other's throats, and we would cut each other's throats for a story.
Absolutely.
But we remain very, very good friends, and I think our friendship has actually grown recently for fairly obvious reasons, and I trust the guy implicitly. He's a real friend.
Stephen?
Yeah, Only people who've done our job can know just how difficult it is. But we also did things that we can now reveal, now that we're on our way out, so that all those times we were sent off to Washington, for instance, with a skeleton staff and no way of getting it all done, wouldn't be the first time that Ken and I have shared interviews. Here, you do Adams for me and I'll do Trimble for you. With different backgrounds, so nobody would ever know. If word had come in that we were doing that, would have been out the door in 2 seconds flat. But
shall we tell the story about Trimble and Malin?
Yeah. I can't believe I'm having to say this, but you're out of practice. Hold your mics up a wee bit closer to your mouth. Sorry about this.
The Trimble and Malin was an unusual relationship at the start, and they'd gone to Washington to meet President Clinton, and it was very important. There was a sort of a sense of unity and purpose, and so the two of us. What was the name of the hotel?
The Latham. That Trimble was in.
Uh-huh. And do you want to take it on when we arrived?
Yeah. So. They wanted to get the two of them together as a couple, as it were, that sort of, get them to the pub and, have a drink. So he, I think, was told, were you told to get Trimble?
I was told to get Trimble.
I was told to get Malin. It's not easy to get Malin to go to a pub, I had to say, back in the day. So all of a sudden, Trimble goes missing. Where was he?
In the bookshop, Barnes and Noble, and
he was in the Latham Hotel because Barnes and Noble was virtually next door, and he'd go in there and hide, buy books, and drink coffee.
The head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service came to the two of us. I don't know what to do. They're not speaking. Trimble's people are that side. Malin's people are that side. And it was like daggers are done. It was like the start of the Troubles again. But eventually we got them going.
Gotcha. Right, starting with you, Ken. If you have a look at that screen there, and if everybody else has a look at the big screen here, this should bring back some happy memories. Roll VT.
There was a degree of surprise that it actually happened. Now, even that was a shock to me.
As one American observer said this morning, it looked good to the folks back home.
You must remember, this is the most exciting period. There's been 2 years here with absolutely nothing happening. At least we think we're going to get a result one way or another Thursday night.
This is Ken Reid for UTV Live at Castle Building, Stormont.
I mean, it's absolutely grim. Luxury in London. Dublin was absolutely divine. And here is just a tip.
It's fair to say that the Unionists are fairly cool at this stage. What is particularly embarrassing for the government is the fact that this document has been leaked at all.
The problem now is working out the exact timescale for political development.
Here in Downing Street this morning. But some of my sources in Dublin are saying there's no guarantee of that. But all sides agree that many problems still lie ahead. Ken Reid, UTV Live, Dublin.
Agriculture Minister in the South when I worked in Cork, saying to me at a count in the Neptune Centre in Cork, really this is a blood sport.
Well, here to discuss it with me is our political editor, Ken Reid. Ken.
And now live to Parliament Buildings, our political correspondent, Ken Reid's waiting for us. Ken.
Are you inside or outside, Ken?
I'm outside Ian.
And you're still laughing.
There he is.
Oh, yeah.
Years later, it was a more mellow Ian Paisley who told Ken Reid he was calling it quits.
I believe that the time has come.
I was brought into a room and he told me what he was going to do, and then we did the interview. But the interview was embargoed to 6 o'clock, And I think other journalists had sort of suspected that I had something big because the rumours were sweeping. So that was a very difficult hour and a half before the story appeared on UTV Live at 6.
Ian Paisley decides to go, and he breaks the news on UTV.
This is Ken Reid for UTV Live in Westminster, at Westminster, Dublin.
This is Ken Reid for Counterpoint in Washington.
At the Northern Ireland Forum, at number 10 Downing Street.
Ken Reid, UTV Live, Stormont.
Quite a career, Ken. Rubbish.
Wasn't that good?
What stands out when you look back at all of that?
I suppose that the moment that I thought, I don't believe this, was in the White House. You know, standing there, we were in the line to meet Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and saying, well, I remember sitting in Rosebank Street in the Crumlin Road, and up in Ballysillen, and I could never have thought that I'd be in the White House. And of course, I ended up being in there numerous times, including in the Oval Office. I think that probably was, for me, the highlight. Looking at those pictures, I wore some awful coats over the years. The barber was a particular one. It's been a tremendous journey, you know, right from the newsletter. And I witnessed some awful events in the newsletter. I think Stephen and me probably have the experience of being reporters who covered the Troubles and then the whole peace process. And that was a tremendous adventure. And I did spend some time down south, although I was sent up here a lot and covered Europe for the Examiner. But really at UTV, it's been, I joined UTV just before the IRA ceasefire, and then one event after the other. And that was, I think, in August, and 2 weeks later, I was doing a live from Horse Guards Parade in London, and I think if you saw those pictures, you'd say that man has no future in television, you know. But I enjoyed Cork immensely, you know. The people there were terrific, and I always remember that I ended up writing the leaders for the Cork Examiner, and Ted Crosby, who was the owner, brought me in and said, right, it's great to have somebody from the big prod from the north writing the leaders in the Cork Examiner. Here are the rules now. You can call for anything you want. You can call for free contraception, anything you want, as long as you attack Dublin 4 times a week. You know? The other one he told me was about Henry Ford when he opened the factory in Cork. They decided that they better make a donation. There was a sort of a mixed feeling about it. He was bringing in industry, but they thought he'd make a donation to the Mercy Hospital in Cork. So he made a donation of £1,000, which was a lot of money, but the Examiner, the Crosby at that time said, put another extra, another nought on that in the headline. So it came back to Henry Ford. He said, what are you going to do? He said, only give him 1,000. They're saying I've given him 10,000. He says, well, the PR guy said, well, if you don't do it, it's not going to look. He said, right, give them it. He said, on one stipulation, that on the entrance to the hospital, I want a big sign up. For I was a stranger and you took me in.
Oh, very good. Ken, if you look around this room, you'll see a lot of BBC people here. There's Mary Kelly, Louise Duffy, Brian Rowan, Gareth Gordon. Have I missed anyone? There's Donna here. There's Mark Davenport, Dennis Murray. You ruined our day with that Ian Paisley scoop. Did you know that?
No. It was so bad. Yeah, I got very drunk. No, it's a funny thing about that scoop. I realised that Paisley had given me the interview, but then I was thinking ahead, and actually got on a plane at 7 o'clock the next morning to interview Peter Robinson, who would be the successor. And I don't think the Beeb had caught on to that. So it was 2 days on the trot that it happened. Yeah.
Just rub it in, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. But were we sneaking around your office or anything? I was in England at the time.
There was a certain BBC reporter who, when I opened the door, had their ear to the door. What was going on, you know?
Martina Purdy?
It would be. I couldn't possibly comment.
Good honour. Good honour. Good honour. Before we turn to Stephen, I mean, you had a real rapport with prime ministers.
Yeah.
They trusted you.
Yeah.
And Taoiseach.
That's one of the things that probably working in Cork helped in later years, because I knew Micheál Martin when he was a councillor in Cork, and I got to know Albert Reynolds, and sort of my southern contacts were really, really good. But yeah, I had a particularly good relationship with Blair, Tony Blair. I had no doubt about it at that time. I mean, one of the interesting things, and this involves Stephen as well, after the Good Friday Agreement, the two of us were brought over to Downing Street for interviews, and we couldn't get out. Blair just wanted, this was the moment, this was his big achievement, the Good Friday Agreement. And he had a photographer and lots of photographs. But over the years, yeah, Blair certainly, I found that I had a very good relationship with him. I mean, his own legacy was ruined by Iraq, there's no question. And David Cameron, Gordon Brown. Gordon Brown was a bit aloof, but I got on all right. Cameron, yeah, fine. Boris was something else. I first discovered Boris when I was working for the Examiner, and I was being over to Brussels and Strasbourg, and he was as chaotic then as he was when he became Prime Minister.
I bet. Stephen, a quick word on Ken's journalism before we turn the spotlight onto you.
He was as good as it. Look, we were doing the jobs we did. We admired each other because we were these incredible rivals, but we were also friends. You took your lumps and you went out and tried to deliver a bigger lump to him the next day. And that's the way it was. Journalism is very deadline and story driven. So we had a heck of a time, I have to say. And I do remember that. I remember one occasion when we were in Downing Street, I think out in the back lawn having tea with Tony Blair. Gerry Adams was in number 10. And David Trimble would not come down to number 10 because Adams was there, so he was sulking in the House of Commons. Meanwhile, we just drank tea.
All right. Gotcha.
The other, Mike Nesbitt's here. I mean, I had a great relationship with Mike over the years. It sort of became like a double act. And we never rehearsed once, you know, which was quite remarkable. It was probably shown on the TV. But the night that the famous handshake between Mayhew and Adams in the hotel in Washington, I think it was 1995, the investment conference. We were going up and down the lift to try and find where this was happening. And eventually Adams came in the lift and shook our hands. So
Right. Stephen Grimason, greatest hits, roll VT.
Negotiations here in Castle Buildings are effectively in limbo. 18 months of consultation are now at an end. It can hardly have been said to have captured the public imagination. There should be no hitches with the consultation process as a result of what he called an intensive media propaganda campaign aimed at discrediting him. However, there's no sense of crisis. Both sides were today stressing that they could still do business together. How accurate do you think those predictions are? They say their views of what happened in 1690 have already changed as a result of being involved in the project. British and Irish officials are working on a joint response. They've labelled the process a cheap solution to an expensive problem. The Northern Ireland parties may come here with their separate agendas, but the Clinton administration has a single point to make. Things are never going to be the same again. Or are they just a bit of fun? Sorry. Thank you, Senator Lindsay. Merry Christmas, VT. Decommissioning is still a factor, and there's a wasp on the nose. Oh, Lordy. Sorry.
into this programme because there's some news just coming in. Stephen Grimason, the BBC's political editor, has resigned his job and is moving across to Stormont. This has shocked management.
I must say I wish him very well in his new job, and I hope he will spin very well. And spin, of course, on behalf of all of the people out there, so that they are fully informed as to what is happening in our new situation.
Stephen Grimason, BBC News, Westminster. Stephen Grimason, BBC News at the White House. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, Oslo. Stephen Grimason, BBC News, Brighton. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, New York. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, Stormont. Stephen Grimason, Newsline at the Forum. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, Stormont.
Okay, Glenn, thank you very much indeed. Now, Stephen Grimason joins us once again from our outside broadcast point there. Stephen, anything new in the last 20 minutes?
Well, this is it. This is the
You
agreement.
have it in your hand.
I have it in my hand. 67 pages. Getting closer all the time to that time when the two Prime Ministers we expect will shake hands with the Chairman to signify the deal.
Stephen, go and read it and inwardly digest it. We'll be back on air around about 2 o'clock, I think. We'll cover all activity at Stormont this afternoon. For now, from all of us here, a very good afternoon to you.
He'll be a tough act to follow.
Stephen Grimason of BBC Northern Ireland.
Stephen Grimason, Newsline, Washington. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, Dublin. Stephen Grimason, Newsline, Belfast. Stephen Grimason, BBC News, Stormont.
Stephen Grimason, who gave it to you?
Well, I think there's a reporter in England called Oakshott who needs to know that a source isn't just for Christmas. People went to great risks to get me that document, and I, for one, am never going to let that go. If they want to emerge from the woodwork and say, we did it, or I did it, or whoever did it, that's up to them. But that's not what we do.
You say that, but for those of us old enough to remember 1998 and just how fragile society was here, there was a chance to build something. You could have scuppered that, some might say, with your document.
Well, some might say, but let me give you the real truth, is that people only leak things. Either they're unhappy, and if you don't run it, they'll give it to somebody else, or, as in that particular case, I think that was done to push this over, to help push this over the line, and maybe that had an effect, maybe it didn't. But the BBC had a little moment in the week where messengers were dispatched to me to say that George Mitchell has said lives and deaths will be at risk if this all is leaked and all the rest of it. No way are you not going to run the story, because it is, people only leak if they're unhappy in one direction, direct the process. But I think that was the one occasion when a leak was made to help sustain the process.
I mean, we have experienced journalists in the room. You know, Dennis Murray was there at the time, with Damien McGee, who's the current editor of radio and TV. What happens if the editor back then had said, you know what, Stephen, let's just hold this until it actually happens?
Sorry, that line's breaking up. I can't quite hear you.
And on a more trivial note, what were you and Mark Devonport laughing at in the Portakabin? Can you remember?
There was what I had done was I'd gone into that with the entire BBC. Jane Dodge was there as well, now Channel 4. And I had got the document just broken, that I'd got the document, and then we, 20 minutes between then and the next episode of the show, as it were. And so I was taking them through it, and I had made some disparaging remarks, possibly, about a certain other journalist, Mr. Devonport. There was a degree of, shall we say, profanity in the conversation.
Oh, right.
Which Peter...
Cooper?
Peter Peter Cooper was recording for posterity. There's a longer version of that tape somewhere, and I really think it should be found.
I need to go back to the library. Apart from that moment, anything else stick in the memory from all those years?
Well, everybody always says to me, I bet your favourite day in journalism was that day. And it's not, for a very, very personal and other reason. I remember after presenting Inside Politics, leaving the building, the BBC building, one Saturday afternoon. And as I was leaving, George Best was coming in to do the sports programme in the afternoon. And I sort of know, it's George Best. And I was totally starstruck. And as I'm going out the door, he says, oh, and he called me over. And he said, you're Stephen Grimason, aren't you? I said, yeah. He says, I love the way you do that, politics. Wee bit of humour, a bit of crack. And I was just like blown away. So, hundreds of millions of people have recognised George Best during his career. George Best recognised me. It doesn't get any better than that. And then the clincher. He always wanted to play for Chelsea. And the clincher,
I don't think that's true, Stephen.
The clincher on that was when I got a phone call from Sir Nigel Hamilton, the head of the civil service. I was sitting in Shanton Park Golf Club, my second home, and I was having a few scoops with the boys after a round of golf. Sunday afternoon, about 4 o'clock, and he says, George Best's funeral isn't going to be in Castlereagh council offices because Sainsbury's have complained to Downing Street they'll lose a day's trade.
My goodness.
It's all politics is local, as Tip O'Neill used to say. So I said, yeah, that's all very well, but what's that got to do with me? And he says, you're organising it, your budget is £300,000, and the Secretary of State, Peter Hayne, says it better be world class.
And it was.
And so I organised George Best's funeral, and it just was one of the greatest weeks of my life. I met the family the next day. You couldn't, in that week, there were no crash barriers anywhere in Ireland except Belfast. We had them all. And the amount of goodwill and support and help that we got for that. I got a very kind letter from Derek Henderson and Press Association afterwards saying just how well it had been done, and it kind of made up for the fact that he lied about the Good Friday Agreement. He said, when his office rang him when I did this, he said, that's a speculation, don't be listening to that.
He was right, though, about Castle Buildings being a tip, wasn't he?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think the NIO are here as well, aren't they? Before I ask the audience, Ken, a quick word about Stephen's journalism.
Stephen's a fabulous journalist. There's no question about it. And, what you do know is when you respect your rival, that's very, very important. And I have nothing but the utmost respect for Stephen, both in his career and the way that he's fought things recently as well.
Absolutely. Just kind of looking and see a big UT. There's Jamie, there's Vicky, there's Tracy, there's Jane, there's Jeannie, there's Sue. Your colleagues have been important to you over the years.
Fantastic. I couldn't have done without them. And we had great times. Rob Morrison's here as well. And the really friendships, real support, under pressure at times, the way that colleagues like Jane Lockery covered the Oma bombing. That was a traumatic time for everybody. UTV were fantastic to me, and people like Tommy Hassan and Dimpna, who are here tonight recording, a few from Stormont and Al Donnelly, great people and fantastic colleagues and great support.
Well said, Ken. Stephen, same with you. I mean, newsrooms were very different back then. They were pressurised environments. They are still to a certain extent, but the pressure back then was enormous.
The pressure was enormous, and how we relieved that was dark humour and drink. So, and every journalist in this place from that time knows that that's true. But imagine the newsroom that I worked in. It was just full of absolutely brilliant people. I see Dennis Murray. I see Mark Davenport. And unsung hero of the BBC, because I believed he was one of the best presenters we ever had and certainly did a fabulous job, on Good Morning Ulster's Mike Nesbitt. And also just a hilarious man as well. And I see Mervyn Jess, I see Barney Rowan. Barney Rowan and I were known in the BBC as Doom and Gloom. You know, I was gloom and he was doom as security editor. So, you know, I mean, Mary Kelly brought the journalistic strength that she has in brilliant writing to become a fantastic producer on Hearts and Minds, which you will remember was a heck of a programme back in the day. And Good Friday Agreement was largely delivered by the BBC through the staff of Hearts and Minds, and nobody should ever forget that. I also see people who've helped me at various points. The Major, Mr. McMichael, hugely helpful to me. I'm sitting and not knowing what I'm doing in a judicial review, and Ivy saying this and this and this, and brilliant. And I got to the point where he could come in and get the line off me and go off and do something else, and that's a badge of honour I always wear. Ivy McMichael asked me for something, you know, and trusted me to give it to him.
Well, speaking of, I'm told that David Dunseith really trusted you. Joan Boyd from Talkback of old, not that old.
I think it's a tribute to Stephen. When I was editor of Talkback and David Dunseith was presenting all those years, come election time and at other times, Stephen would brief us and keep us up to date about politics, but particularly around election time. And I think somebody like Dunseith, who had been round every political corner you could possibly go round in Northern Ireland, when Stephen came over to brief us, he sat and took notes. Note paper was out, took absolutely detailed notes about everything that Stephen had to say politically. So the maestro rated you. The other thing I want to say just very briefly is that Stephen and I had a third act. And after Stormont and that, he worked internationally on various post-conflict projects with me. And it reminded me, I hadn't worked with him for a long time, and it reminded me when we worked together again, aided and abetted by Miss Sue Corbett here behind us. Stephen brings a focus, a laser focus to everything that he does. He prepares like nobody I have ever known. He reads his...
Even more than Seamus McKee.
Even more than Seamus, sorry Seamus. He reads his subject like nobody I've known, and when you're around him, you just have to up your game. It's been a privilege, mate. 48 years, we were on the journalist course. 48 years ago, we went on the journalist course together. We've been fast friends ever since. I love the man.
Oh, that's lovely. Well said, Joe. Right. Audrey. Can't all be about the BBC tonight, Tracy, can it? Tell me about Ken. He handed over the mantle.
Well, look, I have to say, sitting here tonight, I feel like I'm sitting in the Stormont canteen, a very posh version of the Stormont canteen. You remember the lunches we used to have together? I think you had gone to work for the Empire at that stage, or sorry, the Executive. You were working for them at that point. But you always talked, you always had a glint in your eye when you talked about them. You were always a hack, no matter what, when you were talking about your job. And you made it easy for everybody, you really did. And Ken, they and me, we stood outside that many buildings, that many times. It was amazing. And I always remember the advice you gave me, and it always stuck with me. When it comes to lives, Tracy, don't fall over and don't say, and I'll not finish it. That was your advice to me. You always made it look easy. Always made it look easy. And the audience always connected with you, Ken, because you always spoke to them. You never talked over their heads. You never tried to be smart. You were just Ken and everybody. And people still do this. What about Ken? Where's Ken? Do you know what I mean? They connected with you. You had that everyman touch that I really, really admired and followed. And I hear myself now, when the younger journalists are talking in the newsroom, I hear myself coming out with Ken Reidisms. Do you know the way when you hear your mummy and daddy in conversation? Well, I hear myself, as Ken says to me, and Ken used to tell me this, because it was all good advice, really, really good advice. And you always, and I think the politicians always respected you for it, and I think this is clear with you too, Stephen, there was integrity in what you did. They knew that they were dealing with two honest brokers. And all the way through this, you've been talking about your contacts and the people that you knew and the trust that you built up. You can't do that if you don't have integrity as human beings. And the job was always so important to you. You were a great role model to me, Ken. I will always be grateful for the time I spent with you. And you too, Stephen. You're brilliant. Thank you.
Well said, Tracy. There's something in my eye here. Where's Dennis? Where's the red anorak? Dennis, quick word on these gents.
The red anorak was decommissioned. One of my favourite stories about Stephen was, actually the best stories about Stephen are the ones you can't possibly tell. Like what he used to say about the politicians behind their backs and what their nicknames were. A particularly fine event which was in the public domain was when Bob McCartney heckled Tony Blair in the High Street in Hollywood. And Stephen described it on Newsline that evening as Bob McCartney being caught in the act of being himself. There was a complaint. There was a complaint which was dismissed by the BBC, quite rightly, of course. But my favourite memory of Stephen, which was jogged by him talking about George Best, was George's funeral. It was an extraordinary event. A couple of years later, he was one of the organisers, probably the chief organiser, of devolution finally settling in 2007, as we thought, for good. And it was a very spectacular day, the four main players coming down the main steps and all that, and Stormont being open to everybody. And the thing went off brilliantly, and of course everybody else had gone by about 2:30 in the afternoon, except everybody from the BBC and UTV and Sky, who had to stay there and go on doing live stuff and editing their packages. And I was standing beside the edit van at about 3:30, and Stephen came down the steps, spread his arms wide to all the journalists who were standing there looking at him coming down the steps, and he said, "Who's the daddy?"
None of us are surprised.
Can I just say a quick word about Ken as well? There was a piece of audience research done many, many years ago, and they were talking about the political coverage, and we got to hear about this in the BBC. And I can't think of a better compliment to a broadcast journalist, which is one of those who was polled, said of Ken Reid, "The big man talks my language."
Well said. Well said. Where's Mike Nesbitt? Mike, we'll have long left. Tell us some of the stories that you previously couldn't tell us.
Well, I'll encourage Ken to tell one in a sec, but I want to say I've had a very privileged life, presenting programmes like Good Morning Ulster for the BBC, UTV Live. You rely on a lot of people, sound men, cameramen, technicians, fellow journalists, producers, editors. Some people make you look a lot better than you really are. And it's a privilege to sit and pay tribute to Stephen and Ken, because they made me look a lot better than I ever was. And thank you, lads. Thank you. Kenneth, when you worked for the Sunday News, you were sent to your first rugby international in Dublin. And when you got back, George Ace called you in to discuss your expenses. Please explain yourself.
I'll give you a bit of thinking time. I've just spotted Gary Honeyford from Sky here. Old friends with both Stephen and Ken. Do you want to have a quick word?
Yeah, just to follow up on what Mike was saying, all good journalists are magpies. These guys have stolen from me, I've stolen from them. And the one thing I always remember about Ken, when we worked in the newsletter, we both covered the Warren Point massacre. I was there that night and did a piss-poor job. Ken went the next morning, looked at the scene and taught me that there were 7 senses. He just didn't talk about the sights and the sounds. He talked about the stench of death. He talked about the collapse of humanity that was contained in that moment. And always remember that, Ken, and always try to emulate that. In terms of Stephen, I could say many, many serious things, but there's absolutely no point. I want to remind him of the 6 months I spent in the Sunday News, the now defunct Sunday News, which we helped to contribute to, Stephen. I was left one weekend to produce the front page. Stephen assured me that he had a fabulous story for me. He disappeared. Didn't see him all day, story never appeared. The next morning I got a phone call from Ben Burb Prairie. Do you remember that, Stephen? Would you like to tell people why you were there?
It's a bit embarrassing now, but I was at that point a canoeing instructor, whitewater, and we did the river at Ben Burb. Unfortunately, I was upturned and my head hit a submerged rock. And I thought I had died because I woke up in the prairie about 2 a.m. with all these bells sounding. And it really was something very, very dramatic. And I will say about my friend Gary is that he also was one of the people who taught me a bit. We started at the same time,
But I tip my hat to very few people, but he's one of them. And I remember him telling me about when he started, we did funerals. You remember those endless, horrible funerals? And he said to me, do not bury a statistic, bury a person. And I've always remembered that, and he's always kept my feet on the ground, mostly because he rips the torture out of me. But, you know, you need your friends and the people who'll stand with you. And I have imposter syndrome about being up here and Gary not.
Oh, that's lovely. Ken, do you want to answer Mike's point?
About the expenses? I was always very fond with the expenses clerks. It was actually in Paris. I came back, it's my first big rugby international, and of course I very nervously filled in the expenses. The next thing is George Ace. I was in the newsroom and George Ace was in sport. He stormed in the newsroom and he threw them back at me. He said, I'm in trouble. He says, double O's, they'll be wondering what I've been doing for years.
Very good.
I can finish that story.
Yeah.
I can finish that story. I was the father of the chaplain in the newsletter. Such a thing does exist, or did then. And I remember John True, the editor, said, I need you in here. I finally got George Ace for his expenses. I mean, George Ace could have taken classes and expenses at the Rupert Stanley. But he had him in, and he did this whole, like a judge and jury thing where he had, this is the receipt for your train journey from Belfast to Dublin. And it was £5 at that point. And he said, but yet, I have here an expenses receipt for £18. Can you explain yourself? And George says, well, you know, I had to buy a few people a drink. There's people there from the union and all that sort of stuff. And True says to him, did you have to buy everybody on the train? George's response killed me. He just said, well, I didn't buy the driver.
Well, I know some people have to drive home shortly, so we've got about 5 minutes left, and it's wonderful just looking down there. You see the sort of different generations, you know. You see Davy Linus, you see Mervyn Jess, you see Brendan Hughes, you see Jane McCormack, you know. We're all journalists at heart, no matter what age we are, and we're all interested in what you two guys, just before we go, think about the current situation. Ken?
Well, when I look back over what has happened here, particularly, you know, the past 30 years, it occurs to me that no progress is made. There's two things that will be important. One is that the two governments are working well together. Dublin and London work as one. The second one is you need politicians to take risks. If you think of the risks that David Trimble took, that probably Adams and McGuinness took, really on the Republican side, that brought progress. And I just hope now that watching events as they happen, and that particularly the DUP leadership takes a chance, takes the risk, and goes back into Stormont. Because as someone who has experienced the health service at really close quarters for probably the wrong reasons over the last few years, and particularly the last year, where my new book's coming out, The Guide to Hospital Food, which will not be a good book. The health service is in a state of collapse in parts. I mean, I was in the Royal Victoria Hospital on New Year's Eve last year, and the situation in the ward was out of control. I had a nurse attacked by a patient with dementia. Beds up and down the corridors. It just did not feel safe. Somewhere that has broken down, and I know that immediately the Stormont comes back, you won't get an instant solution, but it occurs to me at least they will have to take hard decisions for the first time. The problem with the past is they haven't taken hard decisions, but we can't go on like this.
Thank you, Ken.
I mean, like everyone else, sometimes I despair of this place. But I remember Martin McGuinness saying to me, wherever he went in the world, the first thing he put on the blackboard was leadership. And leadership is a lonely command. I mean, Adams and McGuinness led Sinn Féin and the Republican movement from, Armalite to ballot box. They didn't do it in 5 minutes, and they prepared the way, and they did a lot of talking within the movement. Where I think Jeffrey is stuck, it's just been almost no preparation. And the fact that he's marched up and down the country with Jim Allister and sundry others for so long about the protocol, it's more difficult for a lot of nationalists, for instance, to have any particular sympathy for him. However, he is now facing his David Trimble moment. And people have differing views on David Trimble. I actually quite liked the man because he was a kind of different guy in private than he was in public. He wasn't as prickly. But he was on the right side of history, and history will be kind to him. The peace process tide comes in and out. And if you're not careful, you're going to be left on the beach at some point. Jeffrey has to either resign or take them back into government. Of course, there'll be a split of some sort. But remember this, the DUP is very, very comfortable having a bout of corporate amnesia now and again, like they did in 2007, when 3 months before Paisley moved into government, he said Sinn Féin needed to be house-trained. And 3 months later, there's the Chuckle Brothers parading the world to wild reviews. So it's all about leadership. It's about taking a decision, and this on the one hand, on the other hand, simply we've run out of rope with that. So I'm hopeful that he will do it, but you can never be certain. And remember, all the opposition to going back into government, they lost Jim Allister. Is that such a big loss?
Final question. Louise Duffy's in the audience. She used to always give me a hard time for saying a final question and a final question. What we all have in common in this room is in 100 years' time, none of us will be here in Belfast. What state, what country will Belfast be in? What is it, 2124? Stephen.
Well, I think it'll definitely be in a state. I mean, if we can get around to just agreeing what the new flag might look like further down the line, I think it'll have done well.
The national anthem will be a good one.
One thing I will say about the future is it doesn't matter whether they go back in or not. Trust me, as a 15 years in the room with budget directors and the top people in the civil service, the new government will be doomed if it doesn't agree and find a way of raising additional revenue. There's no way what the Treasury is going to give them is going to be enough. And I had sat with some very senior people like Andrew McCormick and David Sterling in 2002, and we had worked out a process for sorting out water, sorting out rates, that would have given us an additional 10 billion over the years. Don't tell me that wouldn't help. So it's no longer enough to just see what the Treasury gives you, because look at what's happening in the councils in England. Most of them are out of money. So those pressures will come on for people who don't have a Barnett formula. And I just think if they don't do that, they are doomed from the beginning.
I think Brexit has changed everything. And I think that over the next 100 years, probably shorter time than that, the demographic change in the nature of this place is bound to be in effect. You already see it in the election results, and that's going to continue. So we'll be in a very different place, maybe quicker than people think.
Interesting. Can I just thank you both? Can I thank Queens as well? Hopefully I can hold it together as I say this, but I'm very struck by what Tracy said about how we've all learned. We've all looked at the people who came before us, and we've all learned from each other. And I look at journalism at the moment, and political journalism, it's in very, very safe hands as well, and some of the people are in the room tonight. So thank you to Queens, because I don't think we talk about the media and journalism enough. Thank you to Eamon and all of your team at the QUB Communications Department. I know Elaine is here, Connor's here, Mr. McCartney's here as well. And Sir Ian, your team have done you proud. Dr. Cowan, your team have done you proud. You've done journalism a service. We have all enjoyed it. So thank you. And can I just say, Stephen, you taught me a lot of different expressions. Rosie talked about, when the gazebo went up, and I think you said on air, every circus needs a tent, And whenever Sinn Féin were about to be thrown out of the talks in Dublin, I think, you said the hamster's dead, but the wheel's still turning. One of my favourite expressions, and I promise this, I'll leave it at this, is there's only one thing better than a good friend, and that's an old friend. And it's been an honour and privilege of my life to call you both friends as well as colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken Reid and Stephen Grimason. God bless you.